This is Tax Chats. Hello, I'm Scott Dyring.
And I am Jeff Hoops.
And we're here to chat
about taxes. Welcome to Tax Chats. I am Jeff Hoops, and I'm joined together as always by Scott Dyring, my colleague and friend at Duke University. And today we are talking about non-profits, charities, as we call them sometimes. It's the end of the year. A lot of people are getting these emails saying you should donate to your favorite charity. And you might ask yourself, why are we talking about charities on Tax Chats? Well, of course, because you get a charitable donation if you're an itemized deductor for donating to charity. So with charities in our mind, I've been paying attention to the charity news a little bit more often, a little bit more frequently recently. And I noticed a very fascinating thing that is pretty interesting.
Wait, I know what it was.
What is it?
You found a company that made no profits.
No, that's all of them. They also, no, hold on. They all pay no taxes and make all sorts of profits. That's all of them.
And there are for-profit companies that make no profits.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not what we're talking about.
That's not what we're talking about. They're not very charitable. They're very uncharitable. We're talking about charities, most of which actually do something useful, although that's debatable too. We could certainly talk about that. But what we're talking about specifically is the news that I noticed, especially in the Twitterverse, that was very fascinating, a charity called Horns with Heart. And you might wonder, what does Horns with Heart do? That's what we're going to be talking about. Now, I am not a charity expert, nor is Scott, so we decided to bring in somebody who is.
Well, hang on. I am too an expert. I have a lot of charity. I give a lot of money too.
Love, support,
a lot of
and kindness.
Love and support too. I have 6 kids. I have no choice.
You're full of charity and full of a lot of other things too.
But anyway, we don't know much about not-for-profits.
Not-for-profit, especially not-for-profit accounting.
Accounting, yeah.
Yeah, so we have brought in a not-for-profit accounting expert, Brian Mittendorf. So Brian Mittendorf is actually a former colleague of mine when I taught at The Ohio State University. Brian is there. He was there when I was there as well. So Brian Mittendorf got his PhD from The Ohio State University, where he now works. He specializes in not-for-profit accounting and the role of accounting in supply chain management. He also teaches courses on financial statement analysis for not-for-profit accounting and for government organizations. He's been cited in many media outlets on nonprofit financial statements and philanthropic giving, and is a 3-time honoree of the Nonprofit Times Power and Influence Top 50. It's not very many, 50. And Brian's there. So we welcome Brian on our show. And again, we're going to start talking about this Horns with Heart. What is it exactly, Brian? Can you tell us a little bit about Horns with Heart?
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys. Horns with Heart, this is a new charitable venture which brings together charity and college football. And so the idea, as far as I can tell, is this organization which is kind of delving into this world of NIL, name, image, licensing arrangements for college athletes. And it is a charitable venture that is offering to pay athletes, particularly those at the University of Texas, hence Horns with Heart.
So tell us a little bit about these NIL. What is this NIL?
So I won't pretend to be an expert in this. Name, image, likeness. So it's this new ability for college athletes to get paid for the use of their name, image, or likeness. Essentially, they can be paid to be endorsers, sponsors, etc. It's kind of this middle ground between college athletes not getting paid anything and college athletes getting paid to be athletes. And so they can get paid by businesses or others for their endorsement.
Now, could the university pay them directly, do you know?
And the university cannot pay them directly. So it has to be essentially a market transaction. They're providing, say local used car dealership, they're going to be in an advertisement for them and they're getting paid for being in that advertisement. And they need to get paid market value for what services they provide.
So when I first heard about this, I thought it was pretty fascinating in that, so there's been this long debate, college athletes, they really are, they're providing this skill that's has a high market value. They're getting paid nothing for it. And yet the universities, of course, don't want to pay him for it because who wants to pay anybody anything when you can get it for free? And so he like settled on this middle ground, which really seems kind of bizarre in that we're paying them for their name, image, or likeness, but that the college itself can't even do it. It's pretty fascinating.
I got another question. Maybe you don't know, Brian. I know that this is really not a thing about NIL deals specifically, but can like I just write a check to my favorite football player, or does it have to go through a business entity of some type? Do you know?
Hold on. Could Tax Chat sponsor? Could we have a sponsor? We could get the largest offensive lineman
Tax
ever.
Chats could be an entity. I'm not talking about that.
Entity.
I want to know.
Well, we don't have an
Scott,
entity though. We don't have an entity. On behalf of Tax Chats, could Scott Dying just cut a check to some lineman and say, "We want you to have a"?
That is a good question. I'm not sure if I'm sure that I don't know the answer for sure. Maybe others might maybe know the answer for sure. But the rules are kind of at the state level at this point, and each university is having their own implementation. So I don't know if we'll see consistency there. I have heard of stories of individual faculty members seeking to get an athlete to endorse their research paper they're doing. So that sounds like it may be possible.
Could I use
I
could use my research budget for that.
That would be a question for UNC compliance, not me. But obviously that was a stunt. But I think we are kind of in this Wild West where we don't quite know what is permissible. Getting back to your point, I think the idea here is that universities or the NCAA is uncomfortable with college athletes getting paid to be college athletes, but perhaps more comfortable with them being paid for doing other things and taking advantage of the fact that they are well known in their communities, and so they shouldn't be prevented from being able to earn money in other ways. I think that was the middle ground.
That does just seem such an artificial thing, right? Once you allow checks to move, I don't really know why it matters what the.
But that's kind of interesting,
the reason behind
right?
The check is.
It's a very interesting thing because it's basically saying Scott can't cut a check to the Duke offensive lineman for playing football, but Scott can I can like pay this person to use their fame to provide me benefits.
But why are they famous? Because they're linemen. You're still paying for them. It's like
actually,
whether you pay
you're actually
for. It's
right.
like there's an asset, and the asset's produced by the income.
Jeff's got a good point. The lineman has no fame to market, so it must be some other thing. But in any case, that's beside the point.
Which sort of gets us back to the horns with heart, which that was, I guess, part of their argument is that offensive linemen don't get enough love, and so this is their niche. Is they're going to provide an opportunity for them.
Oh, so I missed this. So it's like other real businesses will use a quarterback, but you have to get a nonprofit that doesn't actually.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know about that in particular, but just that was going to be their niche is to offer this arrangement for the offensive lineman at the university.
So tell us what they're doing, like as far as you understand it. What's the horns for heart thing? How is it going to work?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, one question is whether college athletes should be paid. Another question is whether they should be paid in this NIL sort of arrangement. I think the unique aspect here really is that it's not just an NIL arrangement. It's not a transaction with a business. It's a transaction with a charity. And so this is kind of the gray area is that you have to pay them for their services at market value. So paying the athlete can't be the charitable activity that the charity is engaged in. So the question is, what is their charitable activity? And they're pretty vague about this right now. It's that the athletes are going to help promote charitable giving or promote local charities. But we don't know for sure as of right now kind of what that's going to look like. So
does Horns with Heart do anything else right now, or was it started just for this?
It was started very recently, yes. I forget when they filed, but in last several months. So in time to be able to pay the first set of athletes.
So they're gonna bring in money, have to do something substantive of charitable value, and then to raise more money, pay these offensive linemen. It seems like you have to get a lot more money than just the money you're paying the linemen to justify. the charity's
Yeah, so that
existence.
would be one piece. Like, it is, but also like, what is that charitable purpose? I mean, what is the unifying feature that justifies them having a charitable
Weight
exemption, a
reduction
tax exemption?
programs.
So that is an open question. It's interesting, you go to their website, they talk about their spending, like many charities will talk about how their spending is allocated, and they'll split it up between like admin and salaries, and then they'll say, the big bulk of it goes towards charities and athlete support, and they lump those together. But obviously, athlete support cannot be a charitable activity. That needs to be an arm's length transaction. So the relative size of those is unclear. But you're right. I mean, if the big bulk here is paying athletes,
Because in your class, when you would have a student analyze like a charity, you would put what they're paying the athletes for in like the administrative. That's not part of a charitable activity, right? That's the part that like we want charities to minimize.
Yeah. So if you view it as they're not providing grants to these athletes, but instead they're engaging them as independent contractors, then yeah, if their role is to help fundraise, then those would be fundraising expenses, not charitable expenses.
Okay, so here's a question about not-for-profits. Horns with Hearts will have to have some charitable activity that is not paying football players. How substantial do those activities need to be? Like, what are the rules? Like, if they give $10 to a poor person, does that count, or does it have to be like more substantial? Like, are there rules that make something qualify as a charitable organization?
Yeah, that is a good question. There are no bright lines there for the most part. I guess there's two pieces. Does this organization have a mission which justifies its tax exemption? And then the subsequent question would be, are they engaging in the activities which are consistent with that mission? So, I guess on the first question, it would be, what is it they view as their charitable activity? And I don't think we know that yet, but presumably helping
if they have a
local
website
charities.
and it's not apparent what that is, it seems self-evident that they don't have
Well, it's a little bit more vague. Supporting local charities, but I don't know specifically what charities or what it is they're doing. But you're right. It's like they're very specific about the goal of helping support offensive linemen.
Is to advertise themselves, essentially.
Well, so hypothetically, though, just getting back to the technicalities of how this works, they could do something like, say, our mission is to support local charities, and those local charities might be something like feeding the homeless or, helping people with cancer or something like that. And they could use the name, image, and likeness of these football players to raise awareness, to raise money, and then they give some of that money to these charitable organizations, which seems perfectly fine to me. I guess the question is, you're saying there's no bright lines, so it's not like they have to give 90% of their revenue raised to a charity and 10% go to football players. I guess it could be the opposite. It could be 90% to football players and 10% to the charities and a little bit for administrative fees. Am I reading you right?
Obviously that would be pushing the limits, but it's not. I know some states have proposed like these rules that say, if the percentage of your expenses on programs is less than 30%, then you lose your exemption. There are no specific rules like that in place, but it certainly would be pushing the boundaries.
Now when you say states, why are you saying states? Is it
that's a good question. Yeah, so I guess there is the federal tax exemption, but there's also registration at the state level for charitable solicitation.
And that's being registering to be able to go ask for money.
Yeah.
And I suppose
so in this case they might just be registered in the state of Texas. And you probably would see more enforcement at the state level than the federal level on these things, would be on average. And I should state the bright line question you mentioned, I'm getting off track with this, but there are bright lines on some things like political activity and so on. But in terms of like how much is charitable enough versus how much is too much salaries, let's say, I don't think we have.
Do you know what like an average is?
Average for how much activity is
how much activity actually spent on charity versus fundraising and admin?
I guess some of the charity rating agencies like Charity Navigator would say 70% or 75% on programs is a reasonable number. I think Better Business Bureau's Wise Giving Alliance might say 60 or 65%. So it varies depending on who you ask, and honestly, it varies also on the type of organization. Like a food bank, you'd expect that number to be at 90% because they crank through so much, whereas others, smaller,
Could be lower.
might be more reasonable. So I guess it's complicated. Is the
But
best
like
we can
at
say.
75%, like if their goal really is to give money to these offensive linemen, they're going to have to collect so much money in addition to what they actually give to their linemen if it was 75%.
Well, it's not that
fascinating.
I mean, depends on how much you think is a lot. So let's suppose there's 15 offensive linemen.
In percentage terms.
15 offensive linemen, $50,000 a year. That's $750,000.
And the $50,000 a year is what they're paying, right? You didn't just make this money up.
So that's $750,000 to the linemen. So then maybe they would have to have, maybe they raise 3 times that amount or 4 times that. So say they raise 4 times that amount, right? So we're talking $3 million a year. They give 75% of it to local charities and $50,000 a year to each of the 15 linemen on the University of Texas football team. Sounds amazing.
Especially if you're a lineman.
I mean, this is part of the challenge I think the NCAA is going to deal with. Maybe you guys more basketball territory, but boosters of your local sport would be happy to support these sorts of organizations. So it doesn't seem unreasonable they'd be able to raise money. I think ultimately the big question is, what is the charitable purpose, and is this an arm's length transaction with these athletes? Are the athletes getting paid to do something that they're adding this value to this organization?
Well, and I guess another question that I wanted to know related to the taxing is this a way for an individual to essentially pay a player and get a tax deduction at the same time? And I can't really think of an obvious way that they could do that if they wanted it to go to the players. They could clearly donate to the university, which would be probably tax exempt donation, but it couldn't go to the players, right? So
no, but if they're paying for advertising, if you have a car dealership and you pay the person to advertise, you get a tax deduction for that.
A business could do that, but I can't do that.
That was our first question, though. Does it have to be an entity or an individual?
We don't know.
And we don't know, so we're stuck.
But we do know that Scott could donate, if I want, to Horns with Heart. I'm going to start a new one. I'm going to call it Devils with Horns, okay? And the Devils with Horns here at Duke.
Because we know the Devils don't have any hearts, so they have to have something.
They don't have any heart. And Devils with Horns, and we're gonna go raise a bunch of money, give it to Duke basketball players. Nobody will sponsor their football players probably. And I'm gonna be an admin, and I'm gonna take a little fee for my services.
Heels with Heart sounds a lot better. Just to throw
Heels
that out
with
there.
Heart.
Yeah,
very interesting. So, all right. So here's a question: if this turns out to be legal, do you think these not-for-profit entities are going to proliferate, and we will see them like every single college sports team? There will be 2 or 3 of these not-for-profit entities that allow their donors to basically pay players. What's your prediction?
I assume this is going to get some scrutiny, but assuming it kind of gets a green light, the question is, where's the scrutiny going to come from? Is it going to come from the NCAA side, or is it going to come from the exempt organization side, either federal or state level questions about whether it's kind of kosher as an exempt organization? Assuming both of those kind of look like a green light, I don't see why this wouldn't proliferate, right? So there's plenty of people who want to support their local team and feel good about supporting charity at the same time. It seems like the sort of thing that would work okay, and it can be justified as long as they raise enough money along the way. Perhaps it helps justify itself. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, so to speak.
This is kind of a little interesting market niche, right? If these do proliferate, it seems like, you were just joking, Scott, but it seems like somebody will create one of these things to support Duke basketball. And that somebody will be able to skim a few percentage points off the top for themselves.
Diring in Hoops.
And that's going to be Diring in Hoops. Yeah, we should
with advice from Brian Mittendorf.
But I mean,
I'm not joking. I really do think it's going to happen. I think there's going to be like a proliferator of.
But who gets to decide? I mean, it's just hard to think about how like competition works in this way. So there's several. Are they all just going to pay these athletes, and the athletes will? Is there any limit to how much the athletes can get paid? Is it just how much donors are willing to donate to these different entities?
Yeah, how much people are willing to help donate to support these athletes and or to support charity. Like I said, that's kind of the blurred boundary there. There's no reason why local businesses wouldn't just get in on this as well and bypass the whole charity thing. They will love being associated with the football team, or at least the players of the football team. Or so why local businesses aren't going to?
Because I mean, so
the
charitable purpose. There's people who donate millions of dollars every year to UNC. There's no reason they couldn't donate it to a separate entity that takes 90% of that, gives it to UNC, but 10% goes to the football team. Why would? I don't know, I just don't see. I don't see like any natural boundary.
Tricky. Like if the charitable purpose is to support UNC,
yeah, they're a nonprofit.
Yeah, the question is then I think the question would be coming from the NCAA side.
No, but not to support the football team at UNC. They just like give into the general scholarship fund or something else. And so you have this donor, and now they're able to do 90% of their money was going to where it would have gone in the other, otherwise, and the 10% can go to individual football players.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I just keep coming back to from the exempt organization side, it really comes down to, is there a charitable purpose, and is the organization engaging in ways to support that charitable purpose instead of supporting individuals, say like these for private interests? But there's the whole NCAA stuff, which is a whole other set of areas.
For the charitable purpose, can a charitable purpose of a charity just be to give money to other charities? I think
you can be a supporting organization for a particular charity, but you can, I guess for the most part, I would say the answer is yes. If organized in an appropriate way, you could organize a charity that just focused on trying to help support a particular, you have Friends of the Zoo or Friends of the Museum. Those are fundraising organizations to support a particular zoo or museum.
Can we shift gears just a little bit? So still on charitable organizations, but maybe a little bit away from the horns with heart. And I didn't anyway, I'm just curious what you think about this. So, many wealthy people form charitable organizations and then donate a lot of their money to that, like Bill and Melinda Gates. They have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. When Mark Zuckerberg took his gazillions of dollars and wanted to form a charity, he and his, I believe now spouse, I think they're married, they formed an entity, but I think it was an LLC instead of a tax-exempt organization. Do you know about that? And do you know why they did that instead of just a regular old 501c3 charitable organization? And what the trade-offs would be?
To some extent, yes. And Jeff may not remember. We wrote a piece about this when it first happened.
Amazing two-page paper.
And I think it was about amazing two-page paper, of which maybe half of our predictions were correct. Well, we don't need to audit that. I would say we were right somewhat, and in other things we weren't so right. So I think the story there really is you really only need the charitable entity at the moment you need a tax deduction, right? So otherwise things can flow through an LLC. There's much less reporting requirements to the public if money is flowing through an LLC. And if you don't need the tax deduction, it gives you a lot more flexibility of doing political activities and so on. So I think that was the story for them. They don't have, it's weird to say, but they don't have that much in the way of taxable income. They have a lot of wealth through Facebook, but it doesn't pay dividends. So until they sell it, they don't really have much in the way of taxable income. You can speak more to this stuff, but
and even when they sell it, there's limits to how much you can deduct anyways, and they're going to top that out pretty easily,
pretty quick. Yeah.
Okay, so what you're really saying is this: the advantage of a 501c3 is the tax deduction to the giver. If the giver doesn't need a tax deduction, then a 501c3 might not be the best way to go, because the part of the way that you get the tax deduction is you sort of agree to certain limitations, including certain types of political activity. And if you want to be free to do whatever you want and you don't need the tax deduction, an LLC is like a better way to go. Is that kind of the summary?
I guess so. And if you don't want to have to tell everybody what you're doing.
Yeah, which was part of the Zuckerberg, is he wanted to try. He
Part
had
of the Zuckerberg
previously
story,
tried
yeah.
out things that didn't work, and they weren't bad things. They just like weren't successful, and people looked down on him for it. So he wanted to be able to try new things out and not have any scrutiny.
Okay, so hold on just a minute. Talk to me about the filing requirements. What do I have to tell people if I'm a charitable organization that I might not have to tell people if I'm an LLC?
So the first question there is, it depends on whether you're a public charity or a private foundation. So some of these hyper wealthy, the alternative might be a private foundation, in which case they have to disclose who the donors are, how much they donated, how much they spent, and where they gave the money to, and what they're invested in. So there's lots of disclosures there. Let's say you're a public charity, more supported by the public, you still have to disclose what's being done with the money. Not very specifics about who gave it and so on, but there's still a lot of disclosure requirements about what's been done with the funds.
And so, okay, so now I'm getting curious. So I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
So there's an
Commonly-
exception for churches in the United
I was
States.
to say, this is a setup question.
I was going to say, because the rumor is that there's a lot of money in that organization, but we don't ever know exactly what's going on, and so there's an exemption.
There's an exception for churches. Yeah,
An exception.
It's in the United States or other countries in which this exception does not apply, in which you could see into the finances of some religious organizations. But in the United States, churches are exempt.
Very interesting.
Churches are exempt from filing, which I think the intent is because the government doesn't want to get involved in religion. The interesting outcome is that government's involved in religion because now the government has to decide what counts as a valid church.
Yep.
For the purposes of this,
which is a pretty fascinating, because you get this tax deduction. You can create the church of tax. The church of tax chats could exist, and the government would have to weigh in and see whether our religion is valid or not, which would dictate whether we get the tax deduction or not.
And having spent a little time on Twitter listening to people talk about taxes, I am starting to think that certain tax beliefs are basically religious in nature. At least it feels that way sometimes.
You can try start a church of taxes, and it probably wouldn't be the craziest attempt at getting a church.
There would be others that were crazier.
Approved. Yes.
And then we could that could be the name for how we give to the Duke and UNC teams.
Well, I don't know if a church should be giving to the devil with horns, but in any case, that'd be very interesting.
The tax church definitely should be.
So people have pushed the boundaries on that for sure. There is a approved Church of Cannabis, which I believe is based in Indiana. Yes. And others. So like I said, there's some that have really pushed the boundary there.
Oh, that's kind of amazing. So really, I guess that's a difficult thing for the government to determine what counts as a church and what doesn't, because if somebody claims that's their religious belief, well, how do they refute that, I guess, is really the issue. That's very fascinating.
And then it goes back to the issues we've been talking about, is where did the money actually go? Is it supporting individuals, or does it support not just specific people? And that still exists for churches as well.
So is this part of the reason why churches are often in the news as being like, it's so controversial that they're tax exempt? Is that kind of where this leads us to?
I guess from my standpoint, yeah, because we don't know as much about their filings. And so maybe that's a source of controversy, though many voluntarily engage in disclosure and or commit to financial controls, even though the government doesn't require it. But yeah, maybe that's one area of contention. I know there's atheist groups that have filed suit over this, that because they don't believe in a higher power, they're forced to do accounting, and that's not fair.
So every year, I don't know, probably middle of October, a statement is read from the pulpit in my congregation, which says, this church does not support any political candidate or party, and it's inappropriate for anybody in this church to come to the pulpit and talk about any political candidate or party or something to that extent. Is that basically to protect their tax exempt status? Is that why they're doing that?
I suppose so, because I guess technically this Johnson Amendment would indicate they can't support candidates, though some push the
So
boundaries there
pulpit
too
freedom
as well.
Sunday.
Yeah, I was gonna say some have particular days where they intentionally uh, advocate for candidates. Yeah.
So you're telling me, Jeff, there are some churches that designate a Sunday where people get to go up and talk about politics?
Yeah, it's just all about politics. They basically assert that part of politics is morality, and we as a church have these moral beliefs. We are going to voice our support of specific candidates in specific violation of these rules, and that's what we believe in. And so far, I don't think any of them have been prosecuted about it.
Yes, it's rare.
Pulpit freedom.
So my guess is that's a part that also has to be part of the tension then about giving them tax exempt status. If you don't rigorously enforce their ability to engage in the political process, but then you don't tax them, some people would view that as unfair because they're engaging in the political process, but they're not paying for the society that underlies the political process or something along those lines.
And then there's different tax exemptions for their leaders, and it's not just the donation. It gets even worse or better, depending on how you view it.
Depending on how you look at it, yeah.
Wow. I'm learning more than I ever wanted to know about all kinds of fascinating things. Religion, football. Okay, so here's another random question. What's the craziest charity you've ever come across?
That is a good question. Well, I mean, I think you already brought up the one, not that I've come across it, I've become aware of it, which is the Church of Cannabis, based in Indiana. Related one, John Oliver, who used to be on the Daily Show, he created a charity for the sake of pushing the boundaries called Our Lady of Perpetual Exemption. That was to push the boundaries about what was acceptable as a charity. Certainly there. Those, in terms of the kind of strange ones, that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So, and I can get a tax deduction for donating to My Fair. What did you call it?
I think they've shut it down since then, but it was called Our Lady of Perpetual Exemption. Of course, and it's not a perpetual exemption. They decided to shut it down. So, joke's on them.
Joke's on them. Okay, so now one last thing we should maybe talk about. If I donate to a charity, I get a tax deduction. That's what Jeff said. But Jeff, does everybody get that tax deduction? Do you know?
No.
Why
not?
not?
Because, so as we've talked about in other episodes, the charitable contribution deduction is an itemized deduction, meaning you have to have enough deductions to be able to claim it. So how it works is you basically have all of the different itemized deductions you have, you sum them all up, and if those are larger than a specific number, which is called the standard deduction, they're larger than the standard deduction, then you get the itemized deduction. If they're not, then you just take the standard deduction. So the way you generally think about it is you get more deductions for all sorts of different things, a lot of which are associated with having a lot of income. So generally we think of higher income people taking the itemized deductions and lower income people just taking the standard deduction. So there being no marginal benefit for charitable contributions for non-itemizers or lower income people, and there being these benefits for higher income people who itemize on average.
So it's a regressive deduction in some ways.
A little bit, but I mean, so that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it, and why we have the standard deduction system, is in order to validate these deductions, you have to be able to show that you actually donated and keep all these receipts and keep these records. And so it's an effort to essentially simplify the system, and not an effort. It does simplify the system quite a bit to not have to itemize and keep track of that and do the calculations for itemization.
The one exception we have would be this year. There is an above the line. It's $600 for married couples. Is that, or married filing jointly?
Oh yeah,
you can give a cash gift to a public charity.
Part of one of the COVID relief packages. You can donate up to, I think, whatever the number is, $600 without itemizing. Forgot about that.
But I wonder whether we'll see more movement in that direction. I know this, to Scott's point, this notion that only the wealthy are the ones claiming this, is not particularly appealing for those who want to kind of democratize giving. So I wonder if we'll see more of that moving forward, where everyone is eligible to a certain amount as long as it's a cash gift and to a public charity that's not a donor advised fund. I think is the current situation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Wow, lots to talk about here. I think we're coming up on our allotted time of 30 minutes. Any last words, Jeff?
As always, no.
As always, no. If you know Jeff, if you've known him for more than 10 seconds, you know that he almost always has something else to say.
Well, the problem is I got another half hour of stuff we could talk about, but we're out of time. What do you want
We're
me to
out
say?
of time, so we can't do it. Brian, thanks so much for joining us and for being willing to talk about this. It's really been great to get your insights, and be great to follow up on this sometime with you and get more into detail on some of these other issues that Jeff has that he's withholding from us at the current moment. This has been another episode of Tax Chats. It's great to be here, and we'll talk to you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.